You know, many people imagine that their dream version of life is vastly different to the current reality they're experiencing. The funny flip side of this is that that would then mean that many people are currently living a version of life that doesn't line up with what they imagine their dream reality to be. This might sound like it makes sense, but subconsciously, what that points to is it's a life lived with a certain kind of persistent internal resistance to the present moment. I'm going to invite you, if you choose to watch this video from this point forward, watch it the whole way through. This is an invitation for you to move beyond conceptualizing your life and to actually invite yourself into embodying, to occupy the version of your life that you actually want to live, the version of your life that on some level you may be either stepping towards or have previously been disillusioned by. I am Danielle Lynn, and I walk with people who are choosing to deliberately occupy their lives in ways that are coherent for them, in ways that are yes and, in ways that actually speak to the nourishment of their body, minds, and spirits. When each of us is bold enough to start incorporating unknowing in our life, which involves a shift from leading with the mind into a more full body, mind, heart, gut coherent system, there is usually new inspiration, new fusion, new ideas, new catalysts in the world, because it's only from the unknown that the new can come. And so I'm speaking about this at this moment because I recognize you as one of the embodied leaders in this current moment, wherever this video finds you. Embodied leadership is less about hierarchy and telling people what to do. And it's more of a leading through coherence, leading through example, leading through how you choose to live your life. And instead of necessarily telling people what they should be doing, you are embodying and therefore demonstrating an active, in-process blueprint of what is possible for anyone or anyone, anything who is feeling a yes and with what you got going on. And one of the reasons this kind of modeling is so empowering, and one of the reasons I specifically pointed out moving beyond hierarchy, is what I find happens is through that modeling. So let's say you embody something, you're inspiring people, you're in your leadership sphere, not because you're attempting to garner followers, but just because you are being authentic to yourself and living as the resonance you want to see in the world. So others will adapt or emulate part or all of what you're doing. And then when they are in their coherence, they may add their spice to it, their unique flavor. And suddenly now we have a new blueprint. Now you might at some point reflect back on someone who had originally learned from you and go, wow, now that's cool. I'm interested in learning from that or parts of that. And so instead of being a top-down system that's rigid, it often ends up being a more organic system that is self-organizing, in which there is dynamic movement within the system where there are times some lead and some follow, and then there's times where some step away and others rise up to lead. And instead of people viewing a step away from leadership as a diminishment, they view it as a natural evolution in having a healthy, robust system and cycle. And so therefore, this is not from a place of egoship, where we are viewing our positions or our roles in life as the definition of our worthiness or our value, but rather as an embodied way of actually bringing together a highly cohesive, highly enjoyable, experience of community that also respects individuality, that also provides opportunity for a person to be dynamic and have multiple roles should they so choose. It's really built in such a fun, fascinating way. But one of the reasons why right now there are so many people going through a certain level of disillusionment with life or with things that they once found joy and inspiration in is because some may be finding that the places that they drew their inspiration, their ambition from, are no longer valid to them. They may not be the same source of drive that they once were. And if you're experiencing something like this, rather than seeing that as some kind of failing or like something's going wrong, I would invite you to maybe consider that you're going through a maturation process, that you may actually be creating space for an even more coherent blueprint of yourself, your life, and your expression to come forward, which may involve a certain kind of completion, release, ending of what was. And I've mentioned this before, that can come with grief. And sometimes people experience this as ego dissolution, right? Ego death, ego completion. And it's not because you're trying to punish yourself, but you can just see the ego as a sort of persona and a vehicle that did serve you in a specific situation for a time. It did. But it would be like taking your car to go to the airport, then you get out of your car and you leave the car to get on the airplane. And it's not that the car was bad, it's just right now not the vehicle for this leg of the journey. And so if you're overly attached to being in the car or stepping away from it, then that could pose a potential resistance to the evolution of your journey, times when you are walking on foot, times when you're in the plane, times when you're on a motorcycle, however it is that you travel. And we can use that example as a very clear way to see how it might seem silly for ego attachment, but there are other ways we do this in life. Like there's times that you graduate maybe from being a student, times that you become a parent, times that your children leave and now you're no longer raising them the way they were. Times where a certain job or role may change, or you were once so passionate about a certain project and now you're feeling over it. And when these things happen, there is grief that can come through because you loved it so much. You loved it. But if you allow yourself to genuinely feel the grief and be present with it without attempting to push through it or immediately replace it with something, you will actually experience a deep integrative process, one that adds depth to who you are as a person, because you have loved and in a certain way you have lost. And you have allowed yourself the fullness of a cycle without necessarily clinging to what was, which then allows you to make your next step not from a reactive place, but from a place of understanding that even that next step will contain with it love and loss. For all things contain this. You're no longer starting new things in an effort to run away from a certain moment or to mask another feeling. Now it's like you can give yourself the space to create from a truly meaningful and full place within yourself. This is actually one of the gifts of pain and of completion, and experiencing that with a full and open heart and presence. And I imagine if you were watching to this point, that would include you. You have depth. You embody depth. Now, there are times that we can step into a cycle where we make our pain story to be this like very important thing, where we feel enoughness, where we feel crushed by it. Now that right there, that's not as important. That's not something you must do. I'm going to say this in a very clean and clear way, because I have been there. And I have been at those points in the journey where my pain had to make sense or have meaning. Otherwise, it felt like madness. Otherwise, what was the point of all that suffering? But there was a period of time where I built an identity around that pain. And one of the theoretical challenges about that is there will be a point to even let that identity go. When a person truly, truly, truly would like to complete the cycle of a certain pain experience, there comes a point at one place or another where you no longer try to either bury or justify the pain or the suffering. You just meet it as you are and where it is, neither needing it to define you, nor imagining that there was no point to it, which I know may sound like a paradox. But I would say more than a paradox, it's a moment that happens for all of us. Because that's the other thing. You are not alone in this journey, because every single human being at some point or another faces this. Every single being faces this, whether they do it in this life or another iteration of their experience. Because it's a threshold that we all pass through, and one that happens right as we are finally ready to truly live as who we are. Not as the stories of who we thought we had to be to contend with the seemingly chaotic inner world that we inherited or that we cultivated or did a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B. This is the real. And this video, this message, finds you at one of these key points. If you have been feeling both a sense of having come through a certain kind of birthing or corridor, but maybe still don't have that full sense of, yeah, this is my path. Okay. What if you don't need to know that before you take the first coherent step from here? What if you can simply move forward from here? Be who you are and live what comes now. I would invite you to consider that this current moment doesn't require more planning for you to be who you are. And that perhaps even the idea that you must process more is a concept. And what would happen if you simply, from where you were right now, started living your life, or the version of life that you have in front of you? Could you make peace with what has not come to fruition? Could you make peace with what has come to fruition? Could you simply meet yourself in honesty and personal integrity right now without needing the world to change first before you're allowed to simply claim your birthright, your breath right of existing in this moment, and no longer assign your power outside of yourself, and simply breathe in and take the next, now coherent step. And then each step after that, no longer designing your life to be something lived externally in which the external features are defining whether or not you're doing right or wrong, but one where the commitment is to embodying living your life to its fullest expression, to the best you know how, in each and every moment, receiving the ups, receiving the downs, and everything in between, and no longer postponing the breath of life, no longer waiting to take in the perfect breath of air before you're allowed to start breathing, which in a sense is kind of what happens when we postpone living our visions and dreams. And I choose to emphasize at this time, I'm not saying, oh, you're not doing enough action, must take more action, you got to be like this. No. This is something more vibrational, more self-honest than that. Because it's not really about overaction, and it's not about underaction. It's not about overburdening yourself with commitments or responsibilities, and it's not about hiding from them either. It's about simply being willing to be honest with yourself in each moment and what the moment actually requires. Because sometimes it's more bold to rest than it is to act. Sometimes it's more bold to take an action after you have listened to the step of your heart. Only you will know, and that directive will shift moment to moment. Sometimes it will be taking a repetitive step that from an outside perspective could look like discipline, but it's really just embodied commitment, lived from your heart, not from pressure, but from coherence. It's a choice to love yourself through embodied, consistent action. Sometimes it's releasing an over-reliance on structures to allow your creativity to come through, to trust yourself to be in that moment. And for those who go, well, how do I know what to trust? How do I know what to do? This is where being genuinely silent, say it again, this is where being genuinely silent with yourself, being genuinely present with yourself, allowing yourself the dignity to meet yourself in moments comes in key, because you start remembering the language of your inner world, not through trying to chase higher states, but to really meet all of you with your hopes, with your fears, with your dreams, with your highs, with your lows, and not the version of you you think you have to present to the world, but the authentic you, to be the listener, to be the meter, to be the embodier, to be the shedder, to be the one that boldly lives your experience of life, because only you are going to do it. There are many ways for you to remember how to connect to your heart coherence. Several of the ways I have constructed in this reality, not as replacements for you connecting to your core self, but as portals and amplifiers of your remembering, of your empowerment. When you genuinely make a movement in the spirit of your commitment, you will notice helpful tools, resources, people, and situations emerge at seemingly prime moments to walk with you, to amplify in synchronicity. At the time of making this video, I have one such of those portals available. This is a very specific container experience. A container is like a curated group experience that has both structure, but also very specific, intuitively met steps based on both the individual and the group participating. And so whenever this finds you, I invite you to check the description link, either for the current one that is happening or to see if another one is about to emerge, because I only put these out when my inner guidance indicates so. It has, which means we are at this moment connecting around amplifying our inner and group coherence. You can also explore the flow book. You can also explore the other items I have in my description link. In all cases, my friend, I am so inspired by you, by your continued commitment to connect with yourself, by your continued choice to move in this world in ways that are coherent for you. And I'm looking forward to our next conversation together.